Here's a question I bet you thought you'd never hear someone ask. Can a pilot be a sovereign citizen? Yeah, apparently so. Let's start by qualifying our terms. A sovereign citizen is someone who thinks they have all the rights that come with being an American citizen, or in whatever country they may happen to be, but they have none of the responsibilities that go along with those rights. They basically don't recognize any laws that someone else might think pertains to them, but they have their own interpretation of how all this is supposed to work. Nothing can sway them from that delusional belief. YouTube is full of videos of sovereign citizens. Some are very entertaining, some are tremendously sad. All of them are a little disturbing, and most involve traffic stops, or at least that's where they start. A police officer pulls over a car that's speeding, ran a stop sign, changed lanes without a turn signal, whatever the issue is. Sometimes it's even because they have a made-up registration tag on the car. Their license plate isn't real, it's a made-up thing. From a law enforcement stance, this is kind of a problem. And what generally happens is the officer walks up to the car and asks the exact same question they would ask you or me or anyone else. Can I see your driver's license, your registration, and proof of insurance? All three of those things are required to drive on a public street. Of course, the sovereign citizen will take the position, I'm not driving, I'm traveling. They kind of cling to that. They've got their own interpretation of what they're doing. They'll even sometimes go as far as to say, this isn't a motor vehicle. Now, I'm going to say you are driving because you're in the driver's seat, your hands are on the steering wheel, your feet are operating the accelerator and brake, you're driving. That's why we call it the driver's seat. If you were sitting in the passenger seat, now you're traveling. You're just in a vehicle that's going someplace. And the argument that this isn't a motor vehicle is kind of ridiculous because it has a motor and it is a vehicle. Therefore, motor vehicle. Now, this may seem goofy to you, but this is a real thing. Some people will even take this so far, they end up in court over it because, yes, if you refuse to show your license to a police officer, if you won't show your registration, if you don't have proof of insurance, they can take you downtown and hold you. It's just the way the world works because driving is a privilege, much like flying. It's not a right. Traveling is a right. I can go anywhere in America. You can go anywhere in America. We're allowed to do that. We're not allowed to get into a motorized vehicle and drive on a public road with no driver's license, no proof of training, no insurance, no registration. That's just not the way the system works. And we do live within a system. That's a society. Trust me, I'm getting to the aviation part. That sovereign citizen may end up in court. And this is where it becomes really, really disturbingly delusional to watch these people work. They've come into a large building, probably with a very impressive stone facade. And that building is full of lawyers and judges and court reporters and plaintiffs and defendants and all the accoutrements that go along with the legal system. They'll come into court, they'll challenge the judge's jurisdiction to oversee this. They'll demand to see the injured party. They'll constantly interrupt. They will come up with some weird argument that admiralty law applies, and we're not at sea, so admiralty law really wouldn't apply. With all the evidence that they're going through an established process that is written down and available to anyone, and there are lawyers available to explain this whole process to you and assist you, even if you can't afford to pay for one. They maintain that they've got a deep understanding of the real system that none of these other people who earn a living doing this understand as well as they do because they watched a couple videos and they read a thing online. It's kind of astounding. So what does this have to do with aviation? Aviation is highly regulated. We know that. You have to get a certificate to operate an aircraft. We know that. There are limitations put on the privileges that you get that comes with a certificate. We know that. It's part of our training from the very beginning. And yet, there are pilots for some reason who think those rules don't apply to them unless they want them to. Let me give you a really weird example that just happened recently at my home airport. I have a couple friends who were flying in the pattern. The pattern was relatively full, 2-3 airplanes in the VFR pattern, an airplane at the hold short line getting ready to take off, and there's an airplane on an instrument approach coming in. All runways at my home airport have a left-hand pattern. Everybody's acting the way they're supposed to. Everybody's doing what they're supposed to. It's going quite well. One of the airplanes is actually on a check ride with a DPE on board. As all this is going on, flowing just beautifully, operating just the way it's supposed to, even at a non-towered airport, if everybody follows the rules, things move very smoothly. And then an airplane calls in and says, simulated emergency right base to landing on runway 5. I beg your pardon? Simulated emergency? Now, if we look at the regulations, 91.3, it's not even buried deep in there. It's 91.3. It's right up front. 91.3 is about the responsibilities and authority of the pilot in command. And when we're in the left seat flying the aircraft, or when we're the CFI sitting in the right seat supervising somebody, we're the pilot in command. This rule applies to us directly. FAR 91.3 specifically says the pilot in command is the final authority for the operation of the aircraft. They take all responsibility for what happens. Now, 91.3 also says in an emergency, the pilot in command can deviate from any rule to the extent that's necessary to handle that emergency. It does not say that you can simulate an emergency and do whatever you want. That's idiotic. What's interesting in this case is the pilot who was flying the check ride called that other pilot and said, hey, all runways are left-hand traffic here at this airport, to which the errant pilot called back and said, yeah, we're simulating an emergency. Think of what that would mean if anybody at any time could say, I'm simulating an emergency, even though there's airplanes in the pattern, even though there's somebody on an instrument approach, even though this is going to screw everybody up, I'm simulating an emergency going through the wrong traffic pattern, doing whatever the hell I want because I'm pretending that I'm having an emergency. Let's keep in mind, simulation and pretending, those are synonyms. They mean the same thing. The rules and regulations that affect us when we're flying are there for a very specific reason. It's to give us a standard way of operating that all pilots, no matter where they're from, no matter where they're headed to, all fall in line and do the same thing the same way. Now, your airplane may fly at a different speed. It may be a twin or a turboprop, so your pattern altitude is higher than it would be for the single engine airplane that's traditionally slower. But we all do things the same way, and let's keep in mind 91.126, also a regulation, says when you're at a non-towered airport in Gulf airspace, you must, not you may, you must fly a left-hand traffic pattern unless that airport has an established right-hand traffic pattern. Which kind of brings us to the issue in this. If that particular CFI doing the simulated emergency really wanted to do right-hand traffic to do that emergency, they could go to an airport with a right-hand pattern. And there are airports with right-hand patterns only a few minutes away from my home airport. This really is a case of just hubris, ego. Somebody who says, I can do whatever I want, whenever I want, because I'm a CFI and I'm pretending I have a situation going on. Well, that doesn't give you the right to cut in front of people. It doesn't give you the authority to bust into a pattern in a different pattern than everyone else. You are violating 91.3 and 91.126. You are in violation of the regulations. Pretending that you're having a problem doesn't change that fact. 20 years ago, I had never heard the term sovereign citizen. Generally, people followed the rules. Now, there have always been people who suffer from ignorance, including me and you and everybody else. We're all ignorant of something. But hopefully we strive to be better and perform at a decent standard for our own safety as well as the safety of others. This has become a real problem in general aviation, where people flying under Part 91, even CFIs who are training students under Part 61 or 141, but flying in the 91 atmosphere, really genuinely feel like they can do anything they want to do because they're in charge. This isn't significantly different than the sovereign citizen who refuses to identify himself to a police officer who has stopped them for a legitimate infraction. It's not much different than the sovereign citizen who shows up in court, constantly interrupts the judge, declares that they don't have jurisdiction over them. I'm not subject to this because I'm sovereign. I have all the rights of the Constitution bestowed upon me, but none of the responsibilities of the laws of the United States or the state I'm in or the town I'm in. None of those laws or ordinances apply to me because I'm a sovereign citizen. Remarkably, these folks will maintain that attitude even as a bailiff is taking them away to a holding cell. You'd think the fact that they were in handcuffs and going into some level of incarceration might give them a clue. Seriously, what does it take for you to realize, maybe I'm wrong? Education in aviation is a critical thing. Continuing education is a critical thing. That's why we do flight reviews at least every 24 months to have an educational experience both on the ground and in flight that will hopefully hone our skills and give us better insight into how we can handle any given situation, whether that's towered airport or a non-towered airport. Speaking of which, there are towered airports not far from my home airport, which is non-towered. It would be perfectly reasonable to go to that towered airport, call in and request a right-hand pattern if you wanted your student to experience a simulated engine failure where they're in the left seat flying a right-hand pattern. That's a real thing. You can get through a really good simulated engine failure in a left-hand pattern or a right-hand pattern, but you have to do that in a place where it's appropriate. You can't just pretend I'm having a problem and then cut in front of people and violate all kinds of regulations. So that makes us wonder, what do we do when that happens? How do we deal with that situation? Can we report a pilot who's just doing whatever they want? Well, yes, you can. You can report them by phone or by email. You could even go into the FBO and say, hey, do you have a form for me to fill out? Because that guy just cut me off and I'm not happy about it. So how do we report an errant pilot? Somebody who has done something just out of the blue that did negatively affect safety and they don't seem to care about it. Well, there is an FAA hotline for this, 866-TEL-FAA. You can literally call that phone number, 866-TEL-FAA, and let them know the specifics. It's much like if we make a mistake filing a NASA form, the Aviation Safety Reporting System. Let them know the details of what happened and they can investigate. With ADSB and all that now, it's really possible that they can look into it. And if there is a habitual problem, the FAA may, and I stress may, take action. There's also a form on the internet, FAA hotline. You can just punch that into Google or Bing or whatever you like, fill out that form and make the report. That doesn't make you a bad person. You're not a snitch. You're a pilot who's acting responsibly, who's hopefully going to get some education for that other errant pilot so they stop doing this. Because let's face it, mid-air collisions happen. They happen in non-towered airports. They happen at towered airports. They often happen because somebody is doing something they're not supposed to do, but they figure it doesn't matter. It's just me up here. There is nobody else. There's almost always somebody else somewhere. We are fortunate in the United States to have a remarkable freedom to fly wherever we want to fly, in pretty much whatever we want to fly, to get places for recreational purposes, for business purposes, because we want to see the changing leaves in the fall, whatever it is. But we all have to watch out for ourselves and we have to watch out for each other. I've made mistakes in the air just like you have. It happens. And when we make a mistake, our best bet is to do a mea culpa. I'm really sorry. I'll break out of that right-hand pattern. We'll come back. We'll do our simulated engine failure, but we'll do it in a left-hand pattern. Or we'll go to an airport with a right-hand pattern. Or we'll go to a towered airport and make a request so that it can be handled safely. You don't want to get into a fight on the ramp. You certainly don't want to get in an argument over the radio. It was perfectly reasonable for that applicant on a check ride to call that other pilot and say, hey, it's left-hand traffic at all these runways. It was totally inappropriate for that CFI to call back and say, yeah, we're pretending we have a problem, so we're just doing whatever we feel like. Be the good guy. Follow the rules. Act in a responsible manner. Try not to violate 91.3. Try not to violate 91.126. As a matter of fact, just a blanket rule, try to stay in line with all the regulations. Your life will be much better off, just like when you inadvertently blow through that stop sign and the cop stops you and walks up to your window and says, can I see your driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance? If you're polite and hand over those 3 forms in a timely manner, you very well may get away with nothing more than a warning. Or you might end up with a busted window and get dragged out of the car and be face down in the cement and get hauled off to jail. It's totally your choice, but one is much easier than the other. Thanks so much for watching. I appreciate it. I hope you'll click like on this video, share it on social media if you would, and of course, subscribe to the channel because we would love to have you along for the ride. I'll see you next time.